Hi guys, so our good friend Iain Duncan Smith appeared on Sky News as his part of Operation Protect Big Dog. Basically, let's get Boris Johnson out of the hole that he's dug for himself by once again throwing someone else under a bus. Smith was asked about morals in political life and his response to this was hilarious. But listen to him go on and blame members of staff at Number 10 for what happened. This is all part of a plan to deflect blame from the Prime Minister, who is ultimately in charge here. What a pathetic individual Smith is.
Right, forgive me for interrupting you, but I want to move on to, of course, the issue of the day. And let me be absolutely straightforward in asking this question. Let's leave the technicalities and even the kind of small politics out of this. You've done the job. Do you think that Boris Johnson is morally fitted to remain as leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, one rule I always made for myself is not to enter the world of morals. And I'll leave that to those who practice and preach and deliver religion. And once.
Okay. Well, at least he's been honest here. He's describing himself as an amoral person. I would actually go a bit further and say he's immoral, because he's saying here that, well, you know, when you become a politician, you leave the morals at the door. And that explains a lot. That explains the lies over Brexit. Iain Duncan Smith says, it's okay for me to lie to my constituents, lie to the public about Brexit, because I'm an amoral person. Morals don't come into it. So it's okay to lie in order to get over a problem, whatever that problem seems to be. So we can apply that to everything. So when Iain Duncan Smith says anything, we should stop listening to him because he's amoral. He doesn't believe in telling the truth because he's a politician and he's explained it here. The only people who should be involved in morals in any way are religious people. I find that strange, but okay. So Iain Duncan Smith is saying here, I don't involve myself in morals because I'm a politician. Wow.
Politicians start lecturing about morals.
Forgive me, you will have been talking to your constituents this weekend.
Completely different issue.
It would be hard to imagine that question is not being asked between them and to you.
Well, you know, is it a morality question or is it a question about whether or not these things should have happened? So let's remove the two and just deal with the reality. This is unforgivable. There is no question that what has been going on, and despite your previous interviewee, has unearthed a culture which has become lazy and slack about what happens after hours, what happens in offices. You know, most businesses wouldn't allow what was going on in the offices, even though people have been under pressure. This was in the...
This is part of an operation to protect Boris Johnson. And what he's doing here is he's blaming the staff. It's the culture in Number 10. It's not Boris Johnson. Notice he never mentioned the Prime Minister. He never mentioned Boris Johnson. He said, yes, you know, it's regrettable. There were mistakes made. It was wrong. But he never said that Boris Johnson made a mistake. Boris Johnson was wrong here. The Prime Minister was wrong. So he's protecting Boris Johnson by not mentioning his name. And who is he attacking? Members of staff. But Boris Johnson is the boss. And using his analogy of a company, I don't know if Iain Duncan Smith understands how a company operates, but the CEO or the president is ultimately responsible. So if members of staff are breaking the law and they're not being punished, and we see the president of the company or the CEO also breaking the law, then those members of staff must resign and the CEO or the president of the company must resign. Instead, what he's trying to suggest is, while there's a bad culture within the company, it's not the CEO's fault. It's not the president of the company's fault. We should sack the staff and let the president or the CEO remain in place. A disgusting individual.
In the middle of lockdown with oppressive rules about what people could and couldn't do. And there's no question my constituents, other constituents are quite rightly very angry about the fact that many of them were having to obey what some of us felt were over-onerous rules, but nonetheless they were rules.
What the hell is he talking about here? the rules were in place to protect the NHS. Now, yes, of course, he's a member of these anti-lockdown groups, or I think he's at least aligned with them. So he didn't want any sort of lockdown at all. And he's blaming the rules. So he's blaming the staff and he's blaming the rules and saying the rules were oppressive and, it's understandable if people wanted to break them. Is that what he's saying? That's what I'm trying to understand from this. So he starts off by saying that it was the fault of the staff, and now he's saying, well, the rules were too strict.
And yet there seem to be others doing things that they weren't able to do at the heart of government, or maybe across government too, in other departments. So the key thing here is this was wrong. There is no question for it. There's no explanations. There's just apology and contrition. And we have to see now what Sue Gray comes up with, to the extent of it, who was responsible and how this all worked.
Who is responsible? We know who is responsible. The CEO, the president of the company. Boris Johnson is responsible. Boris Johnson has to be ultimately responsible. Now let's flip this and engage in a hypothetical for a moment. Imagine Jeremy Corbyn had won the election back in 2019. Or there was an election last year and Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. Do you think Iain Duncan Smith would be saying, we need to wait for the report? Or do you think Iain Duncan Smith would be saying, we need to hold the person responsible for all of this to account, and the person ultimately responsible is the Prime Minister? He's a charlatan. He's demonstrated here that when it comes to morals, he leaves them at the door, and that is hugely insightful because it explains a lot to me. It explains the lying over Brexit. It explains the lying and the protection of the Prime Minister over this particular issue. He doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't care about being a leader in public life. He doesn't care about setting an example. We're at this stage now. We need to protect Boris Johnson. We need to keep him in place. And if it requires throwing members of staff who were, in a sense, doing what Boris Johnson was doing, we're going to throw those under a bus. Now, one other thing I want to say about this is if you were a member of staff at Number 10 and you saw Boris Johnson breaking the rules and Boris Johnson said, come on outside, we'll have a glass of wine together, you had a moral obligation to say no. I don't think he was going to fire you if you said no. But you had to find an excuse and say, I'm sorry, I have to work, or I need to continue, I need to go home, or something like that. The staff who engaged with Boris Johnson should be sacked because they broke the law. But Boris Johnson should resign. And if he doesn't resign, the Conservative Party should kick him out. But as I said before, this is part of what's the so-called Operation Protect Big Dog. Protect Boris Johnson. And if it requires throwing the entire Number 10 staff out under a bus, then they'll do that. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?